Exploring Hanukkah. All right, everybody. Exploring Hanukkah. First of all, if I can get this thing to move forward, let's see. Why isn't this moving forward? Let's see. There we go. All right. So to celebrate Hanukkah, first of all, we want to invite you to celebrate Hanukkah. And one of the ways that you can do that is actually Hanukkah starts the same time as Christmas. It's a Christmas celebration. It's a Christmas miracle. Hanukkah and Christmas are together this year. So December 25th, we want to invite you to participate in a global initiative called Shine a Light for Israel. It's all started by the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, and you can go to foi.org/shine to find out how you can get involved. But all that we're asking is to show support for Israel and the Jewish people. You would put a light in your window, and we have posters that you can print out that show support for Israel and the Jewish people that you can affix to your windows next to your candle. Shine a light for Israel. You can learn more about it by going to foi.org/shine. Okay. And in the next, I think that's it. Okay, good. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about Hanukkah now. All right. We're going to talk about Hanukkah. Before we talk about Hanukkah, everything is a setup. The story and history of Hanukkah did not start in a vacuum. It actually has a vast history. And I actually think that the history begins right here in an area in Israel called Caesarea Philippi. Now, this is significant because there's a lot of events that are happening in Israel right now that surround Lebanon with Hezbollah, Damascus with Syria, down in the southern area of Israel is Gaza and Hamas, and the Houthis out in Lebanon. So there's a lot of activity that's going on surrounding Israel. This particular location, that if we go back several thousand years, 2,000 years ago, we're going to land in a place called Caesarea Philippi. And you'll notice it's in the very northern area of the Golan Heights. Now, what's relevant about this, Steve and I were talking about this on the podcast today, is that the person who is the figurehead of the rebels in Syria who toppled the Assad government and Bashar al-Assad today in Damascus, his name is Golani, and Golani is connected to Golan, the Golan Heights that Israel controls now. And he was born in the Golan Heights prior to 1967. And now Israel controls the Golan Heights. And in the Golan Heights is this area called Caesarea Philippi. You can see it right here, that little dot there. You can see how close it is to Damascus. I think it's only 40 kilometers from Damascus, not that far. It's a site that I'll hopefully be standing in the next few weeks as we take a group of pastors and Christian leaders to Israel pretty soon. But I want you to center your focus here at Caesarea Philippi. This is also a location in Matthew chapter 16 where Jesus brings the disciples. Jesus brings the disciples to Caesarea Philippi, and he asks them a question. What do the Jewish people say about the Messiah, the King of Israel? What do they say? And they say, some of the Jewish people say he's Jeremiah or Elijah or a prophet. Some of them say this, some of them say that. And then Jesus turns and says, well, what do you say about the Messiah? And they say, we believe you're the Messiah. And Peter says, actually, if you remember, Peter says, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you did not come up with that on your own. That came from God, okay? And upon this confession, not Peter, but the confession that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not stand against it. What Jesus is screaming is a kingdom change. There's a kingdom that's coming, and I am the Messiah, and it is coming, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I will build my church upon this confession that I'm the Messiah. Okay? All that happened right there at Caesarea Philippi. And you're probably saying, Chris, what does this have to do with Hanukkah? Well, I promise I'll connect the dots for you, okay? Here is Caesarea Philippi. When you come with Steve and I to Israel one day and we lead you, we will take you here to Caesarea Philippi. And I want you to see a few things. This is the place where Jesus would have walked around with the disciples and would have engaged with them. The original name was not Caesarea Philippi. It was actually called Panias, or another word is Banias. Pan is a name for the pantheon of gods, the many, 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 many gods. In fact, in that rock face that you see behind the Grotto of Pan, you'll see, you can't see it, but behind the letters, there are these engravings where they would place the gods of the Roman gods and the Greek gods and all the pantheon of gods. And that little body of water that you see over there in the corner, you see that next to the Grotto of Pan? That little body of water is where they believe was the entrance into hell. So when Jesus says hell will not prevail against it, he's looking right at the entrance to hell, this body of water right here. This is ancient Banyas, but there's an amazing event that happened here before Jesus spoke this truth. And I think Jesus brought the disciples here for a reason. See, can I tell you something? This is a very uncommon place for Jewish people to come. This is Gentile. Oh, this is Gentile. This is gross. This would be like walking into a pig factory, okay? If you're a Jewish person. This would be like a bacon factory or a sausage factory. This is gross. This is a place that is completely paganized, and Jesus brings his disciples here to ask a very significant question, I believe, for a very significant reason. Because something happened here 200 years before Jesus asked the question, who do you say that I am? 200 years before Jesus asked that question, there is a significant event that happens in Jewish history right here in Caesarea Philippi. It was called Banyas at the time. So I'm going to move forward. Let's go back a little bit. So now you're kind of getting the feels for what's going on. Let me connect you with the world that is going on during the days of Hanukkah. Alexander the Great, by 323 BC, conquers the entire Persian Empire and expands it. He's a young guy. He's younger than me. He's in his 30s. He conquers the entire world with a small army and defeats Darius III and conquers the entire Persian Empire and expands it. He gets all the way out to India, to the Indus Valley. He gets all the way out there, and his army says, hey, Alexander, I haven't been home for 10 years. I don't even know if my wife is home anymore. I need to go home, or else I'm leaving. So Alexander understands after 10 years of defeating the Persian people and expanding his territory, and he comes back and he's on his way home to Athens, to Macedonia, and he begins his way back. And when he gets to Babylon, which is in this area right about right here, okay, as he gets back to Babylon, actually the young Alexander the Great dies. He dies. He has nobody to hand his kingdom off to. He has no inheritor of his kingdom. He has nothing. So his kingdom is divided among 4 different generals, okay? Now, the generals that we're going to be looking at are 2 generals, Ptolemy and Seleucid. Ptolemy is in the orange and Seleucid is in the green. Are you understanding me? You see it there? There's the orange. That's Ptolemy down here in Egypt, working up into Israel. And Seleucid is in the north. Let me tell you something that's interesting about Israel. Israel is genuinely in the center of the world. Israel constantly is facing the issue of which way to look. Do I go this way or do I go this way? When I mean that, what I mean is the idea of Israel being the center of the world is that people are constantly trying to attack the center of the world, and Israel doesn't know what side to take. I actually believe this is a conversation even in our modern times. Modern state of Israel has an issue on its hand. there are two superpowers at work. And I'm not joking with you. There's two superpowers at work in the modern era. America, and do you remember, you know what the other one is? It's China. China's in the east, America's in the west. And who is stuck in the middle?
And then I just was
Israel. Israel is stuck in the middle. And so when you look at Israel, even today, I remember a couple years ago, Israel was willing to sell a port to China, and America said, are you really going to sell your port to China? If you look at who built Israel's roadway from Tel Aviv to railroad system from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a huge project, a decades-long project. I mean, this took forever. It was a project that took years and decades to do. It cost a lot of money and a lot of energy going from just Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a 30-minute drive, a 40-minute drive. This one railroad system was built by China. In 2019, Israel had reached its highest number of tourists who came to the Holy Land prior to the pandemic. Why? Because Chinese Christians were packing their bags and taking a pilgrimage like Americans do to go visit the Holy Land. So Israel is stuck in the middle of the East, and the West. The East and the West. There were several times that Israel faced an issue of dealing with the East and the West. When Alexander the Great was making his great conquer down into Persia, he didn't just go right into Persia to Persepolis, which is their capital. He actually went down into Israel, into Egypt, and developed a city called Alexandria, which is named after him, and then came back up again and went into the Persian Empire to defeat Darius III. But what's interesting is there's this myth in Judaism that a high priest was in a dream of Alexander, and the high priest of Israel, of Judah, of Jerusalem, told him, his name was Yadua, that he would be the one who would conquer the Persian Empire. It's just a myth. It's not a real story. But all that to say, you can see the connection because the Jewish people didn't know what to do. Wait a minute, we have a pact with Darius and Persia, but now we've got this young guy, Alexander, who's coming and saying, whose allegiance do you show yourself to? Do you show yourself to me, or do you show yourself to Persia? Where are you? Because you're right in the middle. You're right in the middle of everything. So Israel sits in a unique spot. In fact, in Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 5, God says to the Jewish people, I have placed Jerusalem at the center of the world. The whole world is centered on Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem plays an incredibly important place, or else Alexander would have skipped completely over it and went right to Persepolis, but he understood the significance of this area. But now what happens is Alexander dies. He divides his kingdom is divided among 4 generals. And look at, again, the Jewish people are stuck in the middle. Look at where that green line and that orange line are. The green line and the orange line is right where Israel is. In the north is the Seleucid Empire. Oh, let me mute this. And in the south is the Ptolemaic Empire. These 2 Greek empires that are warring with one another. They're called the Syrian Wars. And so they want to fight for that one area that's Jerusalem. They're constantly going back and forth and back and forth. The green line and the orange line are constantly moving back and forth constantly because they are fighting for the control of that one area in the world. Okay, so the Jewish people are stuck between these 2 Greek kingdoms that are fighting against one another. Okay? And so let me move on here.
Hey, Chris, we're getting feedback somehow. I'm not sure.
I know. I'm going to ask Mr. Joseph Karuga to make sure that he stays muted. That's all I'll ask. Okay, so what's happening is that there's this division that's taking place. And this division is going to be really solidified through a war, okay? Notice the Jewish people are just passive at this time. They're in Jerusalem, they're in Judea, But now what's going to happen is when the Ptolemies, that orange area, when they take control, Israel is under their rulership, okay? The Jewish people are under the Ptolemaic rulership. In fact, during this time when the Ptolemies control Jerusalem, between about 323 BC and 200 BC, they developed something amazing because in Alexandria, in Egypt, that town that was named after Alexander the Great, that young ruler, they create a library. And in that library, they want to add a book called the Torah to the library. And so they ask this king called Ptolemy Philadelphus IV, asks the Jewish people, would you translate your Torah that's written in Hebrew, the famous law of the Jewish people, would you translate it into Greek so that we can move it into the Alexandrian library? This is about 250 BC. And so the Jewish people were actually being heavily persecuted by the Ptolemies during that time in the south, that orange group there. And they said, okay, fine, here's the deal. We will go to Jerusalem and we will ask the high priest if we can translate the Hebrew into the Greek and put it in your library, but get off our backs. Don't persecute us anymore. And Ptolemy IV says, deal. You got a deal. So 70 scribes and Torah scholars who understood both Greek and Hebrew at that time translated the Bible, the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses around 250 BC into Greek. Now, you have to think about this for a moment with Jewish people. Jewish people, they don't like common things. They're holy things being turned into common things. I'm going to tell you right now, I promise you, Jewish people weren't like, yeah, that's great. Go ahead and translate our Torah from the holy language of Moses in Hebrew into Greek. I promise you, they weren't that excited about it. But they did. They translated it, and it became what was called the Septuagint, the LXX, the 70, who would translate the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, over time from Hebrew into Greek. And in fact, it would influence the Jewish world so much that our New Testament writers who wrote the New Testament, the Gospels, who wrote the epistles, who wrote Revelation, they were influenced by the Septuagint. They used the Septuagint, that Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and amazing things. So this is an important moment, okay? 250 BC. But now we move up to 200 BC, and guess what? The northern empire here, that is the Seleucids, they want control. And we enter into this period called the Fifth Syrian Empire. In 198 BC, I'll read this to you. The Jews of Israel have become disenchanted with the Ptolemaic rule. They opened the gates of Jerusalem to Antiochus. He was Antiochus III was the ruler of that green empire, the Seleucid Empire. That's actually where we get the name where Paul comes from and was trained over the years. In Antioch is the same town where Antiochus comes from. You can see the connection. Antiochus, and assisted in the expulsion of its Egyptian garrison. Antiochus III, okay? So you have the Ptolemies down in the south who are in control of Jerusalem at that time. But now Antiochus rewarded the Jews for their splendid reception of him by restoring those parts of Jerusalem that were destroyed by the Syrian war and freeing its citizens from taxes for 3 years and supplying funds for the temple in general by permitting, quote, members of the nation to have a form of government in accordance with the laws of their country. So let me come back here really quick. Let me show you what's happening. See this green line right here between the orange and the green? Look how far north it is. It actually begins to move south because of a battle that is fought right here at Caesarea Philippi. The Seleucids, the green, the Ptolemies in the south, fight each other. And by 200 BC, Antiochus III defeats the Ptolemies. And the Jews are saying, we want Antiochus. We love Antiochus III. Give us Antiochus. We open the gates of Jerusalem for Antiochus. Why? Low taxes. Sound familiar? Low taxes. We'll take the low taxes. He'll treat us with respect. And finally, did you hear the last one? We can worship the God the way we want to worship God. It was enough to move, because you know what was happening? This orange, the Ptolemies here in the south, down here, the south, the one when they were in control of Jerusalem, they taxed the daylights out of the Jewish people. They taxed them. They treated them with disrespect. And they also just treated them as a temple state. You're just a temple state. Who cares about you? Just pay your taxes and be quiet. But really, when Antiochus comes, he says, hey, let me tell you something. If you let me come and rule over you, I'll lower your taxes, and you can use the Torah as your law, the law of God. I won't bug you. It's all yours. And they said, come on in, Antiochus III. We love you. And at this battle that happened at Banyas here, guess what? A massive transition of power takes place at 200 BC. It goes from Ptolemies to Seleucids, just like that. 200 BC. This is after the death of Antiochus III. His son takes over, Antiochus IV. Another name for him is Antiochus Epiphanes. And what's interesting is this. Can I tell you something I didn't tell you already about Antiochus III? Antiochus III had a problem. Antiochus wanted to spread his empire. Antiochus III, not his son the fourth, the third, went to war with Rome. And when he went to war with Rome, let me see, maybe I have a picture of it here. When he went to war with Rome over here, you see this big green area? When he went to war with Rome, he expended a lot of money. He used a lot of resources, money. So when Antiochus III died, he was broke. There was no money. So when Antiochus IV takes over, his son, you know what? He's got a problem on his hands. He needs money. His dad blew all the money fighting Rome and trying to push Rome back. And so Antiochus goes on a mission to try to defeat that southern empire, the Ptolemies. And I'm going to tell you something. He gets close. He gets really close. You can see this map here shows you that he comes down the Great Trunk Road, this international coastal highway of the ancient world. In fact, if you ever want to do a funny study on ancient highways of the ancient world, the International Trunk Road is a study. There are more than 26 exits that are on this little red dot right here that goes up and down. It was like it was an ancient highway system. It was amazing. It connected, this ancient highway system connected with this great Silk Road that went east and west. And so what happens is Antiochus IV, the son of the Antiochus III, who created peace with the Jewish people, he comes down to defeat the Ptolemies. And as he's coming on down to defeat the Ptolemies, what's amazing is he gets all worked up about this because he needs to win this battle. See, if he wins this battle, he expands his empire and can tax more people, collect more taxes, fill the coffers that were emptied by his father. Sound familiar? Sounds like America, where we are right now. He's in a lot of debt and he needs help. So he begins to come all the way down into Egypt. And when he gets all the way down into Egypt, he's defeating this empire. He is this close, everybody, this close to defeating the Ptolemies once and for all. And as he comes all the way down, all of a sudden, ships begin to come from the west. And the ships come to Egypt because they hear that Antiochus is moving down. Antiochus IV is moving down. So ships from the west, that's the ships of Katim, also the Roman ships. The Romans come over. You know what the Romans do? They stop Antiochus. The Roman ships appear. Now, the Romans, can I tell you something? There's always a reason why people show up. The Romans need Ptolemies. They need that Ptolemaic Empire. You know why? Because the grain from Egypt fed the people of Rome. They didn't want to mess with this alliance. So Ptolemy's coming down to defeat the Ptolemies. So he comes down, and remember, they were already at war in the north. So the Romans come and say, "Get out of here, Antiochus. You better get out of the south, or we're going to chase you out." So if you look on this map, look what happens. He is frustrated. He gets all the way to Alexandria, and then he's forced to come all the way back because the Romans said, "Get out of here, or else we're going to fight you." And if you notice, when he's coming back, for some reason, he takes one of those exits on the highway, and for some reason, he goes to Jerusalem. He's angry. He's frustrated. It's not just the fact that he lost the war. He's broke. He has no money. He lost the future of his empire. And who is stuck in the middle? The Jews. The Jews are the ones stuck in the middle of this confrontation between the north and the south. The north and the south. When you get to Daniel chapter 11, who is it talking about? It's talking about the kings of the north, the Seleucids, and the south, the Ptolemies. So in his frustration for losing, notice, for some reason, he takes exit 23 right here at Ashkelon and moves into Jerusalem. Why? Because, see, Jews are different. Jews didn't want to become Greeks. They wanted to maintain their own law. They wanted to follow God. And so he comes in, and in his frustration of them never assimilating, he starts to unload on them. He starts to tell them all the things that they've done wrong. You don't follow the laws the way that we do laws as Greeks. We don't want you to do that anymore. You are going to become like us. No more Sabbath for Jews. No more Torah reading for Jews. No more circumcision for Jews. You're done. You will become Greeks. In fact, they offered a unkosher offering, a pig probably, or something unkosher on the altar in the temple in Jerusalem, making an abomination of desolation, according to the prophet Daniel, that was prophesied in Daniel, that was fulfilled in Antiochus IV, and ultimately in the Antichrist in the future. And then also, he set up idols to himself in the temple, and he begins to make Jewish people in Judea offer sacrifices of unkosher things to him in allegiance to him. Hey, look, no more being Jewish. You are going to show allegiance to me. You will sacrifice to me. You will become Greek like me. Okay? Now watch this. I want to read for you. There's a great website I hope I can turn you all onto here. Maybe let me stop sharing here, and I'm going to see if I can get to this website. Let me see. Maybe it is here. Hang on one second. Yep, here it is. I got it queued up. Good. All right. So let's see. Can you all see this? Sepharia. If you want to read all Jewish literature, go to Sepharia.com, okay? Or Sepharia.org. This is First Maccabees. Let me connect you with the story of what's going on. Remember, I told you that Antiochus IV comes into Jerusalem and is demanding all Jewish people to become like him now. Sacrifice yourself, assimilate or die. That's essentially the message to the Jewish people in 167 BC. Why? Because Antiochus IV lost the battle and the Romans told him to go home. The very people his father expended all their money on and used all their tax dollars to defeat are sending him home, and he's angry. And so watch what happens in those days as those as those emissaries of Antiochus are going to the suburbs of Jerusalem and telling the leaders of those suburbs to sacrifice in allegiance to Antiochus these unkosher offerings. It says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Yorib from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modain. So this is a priest, Mattathias, an elderly priest from the town of Modain outside of Jerusalem. He had 5 sons, Jonathan or Johanan, called Cadiz, Simon called Thassi, Judas, who is called Maccabeus, Eleazar called Avron, and Jonathan, whose surname was Alphas. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, in the sanctuary into the hand of strangers? That's what he's talking about, is the fact that Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, goes into Jerusalem and offers an abomination of desolation, desecrating the holy place. Her temple has become a man without glory. He's talking about the temple in Jerusalem. Her glorious vessels are called away into captivity, carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets, her young men with the sword of enemy. What a nation hath not part in her kingdom, and had gotten of her spoils, and her ornaments are taken away of free women. She became a bondslave. And behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and glory, that's the temple, is laid waste. And the Gentiles, Antiochus has profaned it. And to what end, therefore, shall we live any longer? What's the point? Then Mattathias and his sons rent their clothes and put on sackcloth and mourned very sore. And in the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to go revolt, came into the city of Modain to make a sacrifice. So now what's happening is that the officers of Antiochus IV are coming down into Modain to make Mattathias offer an unkosher offering to Antiochus IV, not to God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but to Antiochus IV. And when many of Israel came unto the Mattathias, also his sons came together. Then the king's officers then answered the king's officers and said to Mattathias on the wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in the city. Mattathias, you're amazing, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore, come thou first, you Mattathias, and fulfill Antiochus the king's commands, like all of the heathens have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain in Jerusalem. Sacrifice that abomination to Antiochus. Do it, Mattathias, do it. And so shalt thou and thy house be in the number of the king's friends, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. Hey, can I tell you something really quick as we continue on here in this study of Hanukkah? Hanukkah is the story of something that the Jewish people had to deal with on a constant basis. It wasn't just an event in Hanukkah. It was an event of giving in to the culture of the world at that time. Greek influence was already there in the Jewish world. What is happening right now is just an abomination. It's impacting every Jewish person. But see, Jewish people at this time were already giving in and capitulating to the Greek way of life. Now it's just being forced upon them. And it's one man, Mattathias, who's going to stand up, and he's saying, hey, look, if you come and you be a part of our family, Mattathias, and you become a part of what Antiochus is doing, the fourth, you know what? We're going to honor you with silver and golds and so many rewards as only the Gentiles can give you. Now watch this. I love this, everybody. Then Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice. Are you ready? Here we go. Though all the nations that are under the king's dominion may obey him, Mattathias says, and fall away every one from their religions of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments. Yet I, Mattathias, I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should ever forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either from the right hand or the left hand. Now, when he had left speaking these words, so he's passionate, he's zealous, he's convicted. As he's speaking these words on his soapbox, right to the people, the Greeks that are there, it says, now as he had left speaking these words, Mattathias, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modain, according to the king's commandment. Which thing when Mattathias saw, he was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. So what happens is, as he's speaking these amazing words of conviction and zeal for the Lord and for his law and for his commandments, behind him, a Jewish man comes and begins to offer an unkosher sacrifice in allegiance to Antiochus, which thing when Mattathias saw, it says in verse 25, he was inflamed with zeal. Do you see it there? And his reins trembled. Neither could he forbear or show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew this Jewish man upon the altar. Also his kings and commissioner, who compelled men to sacrifice. He killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. Thus he dealt zealously for the law of God, like Phinehas from the Old Testament did to Zambri, the son of Solomon. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice. Here it is, everybody. You want to hear the heartbeat of the Hanukkah story? It's right here with Mattathias. Whoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. That Mattathias, let him follow me. You can either follow the Greeks or you can follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountain and left all that ever they had in the city. Then many sought after justice, and judgment went down into the wilderness. Now let me go back to my slides here, because I want to show you something. As we get back to the slides and we see what's going on here, what we see is that Mattathias comes and he actually begins a revolution in Judea. And he actually begins because of where they lived. And remember that the Greeks at that time were already exhausted. They had been fighting the Egyptians, the Greeks in Egypt. They have been fighting the Romans. They're tired. They're broke. So this is a great opportunity for them. So Mattathias fights back, and he ends up dying in his sacrifice, in his desire to defeat the Greeks. He dies just 1 year later in 166 BC. He passes the reins off to his son, Judas Maccabeus, the hammer, the third son of Matthias, who led the revolt for 6 years against the Seleucids. And they defeated those troops in places like Bet Horon and Samaria and Emmaus and Bet Zor. And they actually were able to go to Jerusalem and push the Greeks out of Jerusalem, captured the temple, cleansed the temple, and offered it back to God in 167 or 165 BC, 164, 165 BC. And that is the story of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the idea of the rededication of the temple. It was completely defiled by Antiochus, and now it's been rededicated because Judas Maccabeus and those Jewish people pushed the Greek forces back and declared their independence and rededicated the temple to the Lord. And the Lord provided, it says in the history of the Jewish people, he provided oil for them over the course of 8 days. And that's why your Hanukkah, your Hanukkah, the menorah during Hanukkah, is 1 candle in the middle and then 4 on either side, because God provided oil for 8 days. But the story's not done, people. It's not done. That's just Judas Maccabeus. They go on and they continue to fight. Jonathan fights from 160 BC to 142 BC, the son of Mattathias. And he continues to push back. He's the first that's called a high priest of Israel. And then finally, in 142 BC, Simon, the second eldest son of Mattathias, gains political freedom from the Greeks completely. And what's established is this kingdom called the Hasmonean dynasty, this completely separate commonwealth of the Jewish people. Hey, can I tell you something? Why you live in such a unique time? In the thousands of years that the Jewish people have been around, for only 3 moments in history have the Jewish people had complete sovereignty over their land. The first was because of King David. King David established the sovereignty of the land of Israel and pushed back all their enemies. Solomon did the same, and then it continued on until the destruction of the temple in 586 when the Babylonians came in. So the first commonwealth of Israel started with King David. The second commonwealth of Israel happened in 142 BC when Simon, the son of Mattathias, who pushed back those Greek forces, was able to finally establish an independent Jewish state. And Simon was essentially called the king of Israel in some capacity. And so Simon ruled over the Hasmonean dynasty. That's the second commonwealth of the Jewish people. The third commonwealth of the Jewish people, 1948, when the Jewish people were given permission by the United Nations to establish a land. And you're living during that time. Just think about that. King David, biblical. Mattathias and his son Simon and the Hasmonean dynasty, intertestamental. And here you are living during a time period when the Jewish people have sovereignty over their land. So eventually, all of these events that take place, they push back the Greeks, they take control, and this helps them establish some amazing things. And some of the sons of Simon continue this amazing work that they did. John Hyrcanus, who did amazing things. Aristobulus, Alexander Janus, Salomone Alexandra, and then finally the last of the Hasmonean dynasty that would rule over this Jewish empire for just a brief moment, less than 100 years, is Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. They couldn't get their act right, and you know who seized on their weakness? Were the Romans. The Romans seized on their weakness, and by 63 BC, Pompey takes control completely, leaving us with this picture of what Judea looks like. But in the end, if we go back to the story of Antiochus IV, what we're left with is this. Antiochus Epiphanes wanted the Jewish people to disappear and to look like everybody else. But what's amazing is that there wouldn't be a Christmas story, Jesus being born in Bethlehem of Judah. There wouldn't be this story of Jesus's birth, the coming of Jesus, unless there was a Hanukkah story. I want to read John chapter 10 for you really quick, if you don't mind. I want you to see something here. John chapter 10, right in the middle of John chapter 10 is this story. In John chapter 10, right in the middle is verse 22. When it says, "Then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade." Now, so what does that mean? That means John chapter 10 is focused all on Hanukkah. Everything Hanukkah. Jesus celebrated a feast of Israel that wasn't in Leviticus chapter 23, like Passover, Yom Kippur, the Feast of Tabernacles. No. This is an intertestamental history. This comes between Malachi and Matthew. This is a celebration of the Jewish people when they pushed back the Greek forces and they cleansed the temple and they had sovereignty for just a brief moment of history. It's a moment the Jewish people won't forget at all. Jesus honored that. Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the July 4th of the Jewish people during the first century. They knew sovereignty. They knew freedom. They knew pushing back those forces that were demanding them to act differently than what God had asked them to be. And so Jesus is celebrating Hanukkah, this moment. And I want you to hear something, because just before we get an insight into the fact that Jesus is celebrating Hanukkah, I want you to hear something. Jesus says this about himself in John chapter 10, verse 14. Look, listen to what he says. He says this leading up to the fact that they're going to celebrate Hanukkah. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Verse 14. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep, and I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock, one shepherd. And the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. And just 2 verses later, they'll say, then came the festival of Hanukkah, the festival of dedication. Now, let me ask you something. Why would Jesus be talking about him being the good shepherd during Hanukkah? Well, you know what? We're approaching Christmas. And you right now, you can go to christmasisjewish.org and you can download a free devotional that Steve and I created along with our team at Friends of Israel. And you can get a free 25-day devotional leading up to Christmas to prepare your hearts for the birth of Jesus on December 25th, called Finding Messiah and Christmas. And you can do that, all that by going to christmasisjewish.org. But I am sure that as you all have been going to church over the past few weeks, I am confident that as you've been going, your hymns and your songs have been changing. I bet they've been changing. I bet you might have even sang, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. I bet you sang that. Or maybe you sang, Oh, Little Town of Bethlehem. Or maybe you've been reading from Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Or maybe you've been reading from Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Why? Because I know that we don't like the word liturgy. I know that. But as you approach Christmas, Bible-believing Christians' hearts turn toward those passages that are leading up to the birth of Jesus. And we sing songs about the birth of Jesus. But can I tell you something? The same thing happened to Jewish people in the days of Jesus. They turned their liturgy, they turned their songs, they turned their readings away from the common readings, and during Hanukkah, they read different readings in preparation for the celebration of Hanukkah. And one of those readings was Ezekiel chapter 34. Hey, let me read it for you really quick. Remember John chapter 10. Remember John chapter 10. But I'm going to go to Ezekiel, because when we go to Ezekiel, this is what was being read in the synagogues of Jesus's day leading up to Hanukkah, okay? Listen to this. John chapter 10. Ezekiel chapter 34. God is angry with the shepherds of Israel. What is a shepherd? See, our mind goes to a shepherd who's leading a flock. But see, when Ezekiel's talking about a shepherd and when Jesus is talking about a shepherd, he's actually talking about a king or a ruler, somebody who rules over the people of Israel. So when you get to Ezekiel chapter 34 and John chapter 10 leading up to Hanukkah, they're talking about the leadership of Israel, the shepherds of the sheep, not the literal shepherds, the political and religious shepherds of the people of Israel, who should be shepherding them, thinking about them and not themselves. And I want you to hear this, because in Ezekiel chapter 34, starting in verse 1, it says this: the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Ezekiel, you prophesy against those leaders of Israel. Prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says: woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourself. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? Verse 3. You eat the curds and clothe yourselves with wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you don't take care of the flock. God is angry in Ezekiel 34 with the leaders of Israel because go the way of the leaders, so goes the way of the people, of the flock. The shepherds of Israel abandoned the flock and only cared for themselves. They were eating the best food, clothing themselves in the best ways, abandoning the people they should have been taking care of spiritually overall. And God says, I'm done with you. Judgment is coming for you. And look what it says as it goes down. Verse 11. For this is what the sovereign Lord says in chapter 34 of Ezekiel, verse 11. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them, as a shepherd looks after his scattered. Notice now, God becomes the shepherd. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock, Israel, when he is with them. So I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from the places where they have been scattered on the day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them from the nations and gather them from the countries and bring them into their own land. And I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in the settlements of the land. I will tend to them in good pasture and in the mountain heights of Israel. I will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there will they feed in rich pastures on the mountainsides of Israel. I myself, the Lord, will tend to my sheep, and I have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. You know what? I love this. He ends with this. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured, strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. So I want you to think about this as in Jesus's day, when he was going to synagogue as a child and being raised in those moments leading up to Hanukkah, as we begin to hear Hark the Herald Angels Sing, as we begin to hear O Little Town of Bethlehem, as we begin to read Micah 5:2 and Isaiah 7:14, Jewish people in Jesus's day were reading Ezekiel 34. And do you know why? They were reading it because only one man, only one stood up against the Greeks. Where were the high priests of Israel? Where were all the leaders of Israel when Antiochus said, bow down to me and offer an offering on the altar? Where were they? They abandoned the people. They offered the sacrifices. They capitulated. They gave in to everything that was pagan and Greek to save themselves. And only one man, according to the book of Maccabees, First Maccabees, only one old priest stood up and said, over my dead body will I sacrifice an offering to a Greek king. Never. And God used that one man to change the course of Jewish history, Mattathias. So when Jesus reads this, and he's going through and reading Ezekiel chapter 34 during this time, he gets there in John chapter 10. He's hearing those songs and hearing those verses read as the leaders of Israel capitulated to Greece. He's saying, you know what? I'm your good shepherd. I'm even better than Mattathias. I will lead you to green grass. I will lead you to fresh water. I will gather my scattered flock. Why? Because remember, it wasn't the fact that the God would choose a different shepherd. He says, I will shepherd my flock. I will do it. Who is Jesus? Jesus is God.
Oh, you did?
He became the good shepherd. So this Hanukkah season, it actually lands right on December 25th, which is absolutely amazing. It is an amazing moment for us that we get an opportunity on December 25th to celebrate the birth of our good shepherd. This December 25th, I want all of you to go to your families and say, yeah, our Messiah was born, but our good shepherd was born. And I also want to remind you of this. One man stood up in 167 BC, one man stood up with conviction and changed the world. One young man put a sticker on his guitar. It's stupid. He put a sticker on his guitar. And he, you know what? Because of that one sticker of his convictions supporting Israel, praying for the peace of Jerusalem, Steve and I have given out 10,000 stickers. A conviction about what you believe in, a zeal for what you have, just like Phineas, just like Mattathias, just like Jesus, just like John the Baptist. A conviction can change the life of a person if it's shared with grace and compassion and mercy and love. Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. Those other shepherds of Israel, they failed you. I will lead you. I will bring you in. I will bind you up. I will heal you. Only Jesus can do that. That's the story of Hanukkah. God delivered his people and they celebrate. So next week, Steve's going to come back and he is going to share about how that moment of history and all the development that was going on there has developed over time to become the tradition of the Jewish people to celebrate the festival of lights, freedom and sovereignty, and God's providence and protection over his people.